It wasn't the ghosts that worried me. Honestly, it was the mortgage. $782.43. That's what we were behind. Not a round number, which felt wrong. Like it was accruing interest on the guilt. Helen at the bank had been patient, but I could hear the patience thinning with each call. Another month like the last, and we'd be looking at notices, lawyers, everything. The school job was the only option that fit around my day gig at the lumberyard. Nights, mostly solitary, cleaning up after the kids. It felt degrading, after managing a crew at the yard for 10 years. But degrading pays bills. The school smelled like floor wax and regret. Old linoleum, the kind with flecks of color that never quite matched, stretched on forever. The air was cold even for October and tasted metallic, probably just the old pipes. The main hallway was lit with those fluorescent fixtures that hummed a little, a constant low-level annoyance. I checked in with Tam, the head custodian, a guy who barely made eye contact. He handed me a packet of forms, the usual HR stuff, and a key ring, heavy with brass. "Just get the checklist signed off on by Friday," he mumbled, avoiding my gaze. "And there's something else." He slapped a single sheet of paper onto the packet. It wasn't attached with a staple, just placed. It looked different, too. The paper was a heavier stock, almost like cardstock, and the text wasn't printed. It was typed with a very old typewriter, the letters slightly uneven, no number at the top, just a list. I almost didn't notice it. I was thinking about Cassie's doctor's appointment next week, and if I could swing new tires for the car before winter. I glanced at the first rule. Count the lockers at the start and end of every shift. If the numbers don't match, report immediately. Lockers? Really? That was the first thing? I figured it was some kind of inventory thing, maybe a weird attempt to keep track of stolen property. Kids are kids. I skimmed the list. Do not enter the music room for any reason. Okay, a little stranger, but maybe it was undergoing renovations or had asbestos. Schools were full of asbestos. If you feel vibrations in the floor with no identifiable equipment source, stop what you're doing and move to the janitor's closet near the gymnasium. Wait until it stops, I snorted. Vibrations? This was getting ridiculous. Probably just the bus stop or construction nearby. Old buildings settle. The next one made me raise an eyebrow. Do not ask what happened in the boiler room before I was hired. If a coworker brings it up, change the subject. Now that felt odd, a little unsettling, but I chalked it up to small-town gossip. Some drama with the previous custodian. People always talk. Before turning any corner in the West Wing, knock twice on the wall and wait 3 seconds before proceeding. Honestly, I almost laughed out loud. Superstition. Someone clearly had too much time on their hands. Probably a prank. If the lights go out, stay exactly where you are. Do not use a flashlight or your phone light. Wait for them to come back on. That one felt unnecessarily specific, but a reasonable precaution. I supposed power outages happened. If you find an erased or overwritten entry in the log, note its location in your own entry. Do not attempt to read the original. Do not ask who wrote it. Okay, this was starting to feel less like a joke and more like, well, I didn't know what it felt like. Overly cautious? Paranoid? Do not bring cut flowers, potted plants, or fresh produce into the gymnasium. Sealed packaged food is acceptable. What even? The gym? What did flowers have to do with anything? I assumed it had something to do with allergies or pests. The last one was the most straightforward. Your access key must not be duplicated. One copy exists. If it is lost, report immediately and do not return to work until a replacement is issued through the formal process. Standard security protocol. Sensible. I signed the checklist, barely glancing at the other forms, and tucked the rules list into my pocket. Probably wouldn't need it, just eccentric workplace culture. I started my rounds, pushing the heavy cleaning cart down the echoing hallways. The West Wing was next. I rounded the corner near the art room, caught myself, and almost laughed again. Knock twice? Really? I didn't bother. I needed to get this done. I needed the money. But as I passed the doorway to the West Wing, I paused. The hallway felt colder there. Not just the temperature, but something else. A stillness. And the humming of the fluorescent lights seemed to falter, just for a moment, a tiny, almost imperceptible dip in the sound. I shook it off. Old building, bad wiring. I kept walking. I was restocking the paper towel dispensers in the girls' restrooms, mostly because I'd gotten a complaint from Tam about low supplies. She'd cornered me near the front office earlier, holding a crumpled sticky note. Yolanda says they're out in the second stall, second floor. Girls get upset, Casimir. Upset girls mean angry parents. She hadn't smiled. Tam rarely smiled. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it was honest. And it was quiet. Just me and the echo of my footsteps, and the faint, constant hum of the building's systems. I liked the quiet, actually. After a day dealing with customers at the hardware store arguing over the price of screws and the best type of sandpaper, the silence was a relief. I even started bringing my stamp album with me. I'd sit in the teacher's lounge during my break, carefully arranging my collection. The scent of old paper and gummed backing was oddly soothing. The school was old, built in the 1950s. All long hallways and linoleum floors. It smelled faintly of floor wax and something else, something older, like dust and dried glue. The kind of smell that clung to everything. I'd found a few interesting stamps in the lost and found over the past couple weeks, mostly common ones, but a few with interesting cancellations. I was hoping to find something really valuable, a misprint or a rare issue. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was the hunt, the organization, the small, contained world of my collection. After the restrooms, I was assigned to inventory the gym equipment. Tam handed me a clipboard with a pre-printed list. Count everything, Casimir. Every ball, every mat, every cone, and initial at the bottom when you're done. I groaned inwardly. The gym was enormous, and the list was long. Basketballs, volleyballs, soccer balls, jump ropes, wrestling mats, hurdles, cones, those weird blue noodles kids hit each other with. It would take me at least 1 hour. Still better than cleaning up after a middle school science experiment. I started with the basketballs, stacking them neatly as I counted. 1, 2, 3, 27, 28. The list said 30. I checked again. 28. Definitely 28. I walked around the storage room, scanning the floor, peering behind the bleachers. Nothing. I double-checked the list, convinced I'd missed something. Nope. 30 basketballs. That's when I remembered the checklist Tam had given me, the one with all the unusual rules. I flipped through the pages until I found it. Count specific items at the start and end of every shift. If the numbers don't match, report immediately. Report immediately to Tam. About 2 missing basketballs. It felt ridiculous. Probably some kids snuck in and stole them over the weekend. Or maybe Tam just miscounted when she made the list. Still, the rule was clear, and I needed this job. I couldn't afford to lose it. I glanced at my watch. 11:47 p.m. I had to finish my rounds, check the exterior doors, and then start on the office suites. My son, Leo, had a fever this morning. Not a bad one, but enough to keep him home from school. My wife, Clara, was working a double shift at the hospital, and I'd promised to check on him again before I left. I wanted to see if the fever had broken. Just a quick call, a reassurance that he was sleeping comfortably. But if I reported the missing basketballs to Tam now, she'd want to do a full inventory, and that would take another hour, maybe more. I sighed. The rule was the rule. I initialed the inventory sheet with the number 28 circled and a question mark beside it. I would tell Tam in the morning. I'd explain that it was probably just a mistake, or kids messing around. I'd get it sorted out. I just needed to finish my shift. But as I walked towards the door, I realized I hadn't checked the back exit of the gym. It led to the football field, and it was often left unlocked. Maybe someone had walked off with the balls that way. I hesitated. The rule didn't say I couldn't check things, just that I had to report discrepancies, but going back would mean delaying the report, potentially violating the spirit of the rule. I told myself it was just common sense. A quick look wouldn't hurt. I pushed open the door and stepped out into the cool night air. The field was dark and empty, illuminated only by the faint glow of the streetlights. And leaning against the back entrance, partially hidden in the shadows, was a small wooden crate. A crate I hadn't seen before. And inside, neatly arranged, were 2 basketballs and a single, wilting sunflower. I finished checking the gym's exterior doors, making sure they were all secured. The metal felt cold under my fingertips, even through the gloves. It was just past 1 in the morning, and the school was utterly silent. The kind of silence that presses on your ears, makes you acutely aware of the hum of the fluorescent lights and the throb of the heating system. I preferred it, actually. Quiet meant less chance of running into whatever it was that made Tam so particular. The next section on my list was the old music wing. Band practice rooms, the choir room, a small black box theater. Mostly just chairs and instruments to dust, sheet music to straighten. It wasn't a high-traffic area, even during school hours, mostly kids who were really dedicated, or really avoiding something else. I remembered my own high school days, hiding out in the library during gym class, pretending to research something important. Mostly I was just building model airplanes. I started with the band rooms, methodically wiping down the music stands, rearranging the instrument cases. The smell of brass polish hung faintly in the air, mixed with the stale scent of rosin. I found a broken clarinet reed in one of the rooms and tossed it in the trash. Small stuff, the kind of stuff that made the 8 hours go by. I was almost feeling okay about the basketballs. Probably just a miscount. Tam was getting on in years. Things happened. Then I reached the end of the hall, room 137. It didn't have a door like the others. It had a heavy steel gate, the kind you'd see on a loading dock, and a sign bolted directly to the wall beside it. It wasn't on the floor plan Tam had given me. It didn't even look like it should be there. The sign was simple, stark white lettering on a black background. Do not enter. That was it. Just do not enter. No explanation, no reason, just a flat prohibition. That's when I remembered. Not the specific wording. I never could quite recall it exactly. But the feeling of the list Tam had given me, the one with all the extra rules, tucked in with the HR paperwork. Something about areas to avoid. Something about consequences. She'd said people had gotten hurt ignoring them. Or worse, I dismissed it at the time. Eccentricities. Old lady rules. But this was different. The gate was imposing, cold, and the sheer bluntness of the sign felt wrong. I told myself it was probably an old storage room filled with asbestos or outdated equipment, a safety hazard, that's all. They just didn't want anyone wandering in there. It wasn't a rule, like the inventory. It was a warning, a practical precaution. I could just mark it as checked and move on. No harm done. I reached for my clipboard, then stopped. My hand felt stiff, almost numb. The air around the gate seemed colder than the rest of the hallway, and a faint metallic tang, like old pennies, tickled the back of my throat. It wasn't strong, barely noticeable, but it was there. I took a step back. My schedule, I was already behind. I had the office suites to do, and then the library, then the front entrance and the bathrooms. I couldn't afford to waste time debating whether or not to ignore a sign. I needed to get this done, get home, see Leo. I reached for the gate's handle. It was heavy, cold iron, and it took both hands to pull it open. It groaned in protest, a long, drawn-out screech that echoed down the empty hallway. I hesitated for only a moment, then squeezed through the opening. The room wasn't what I expected. It wasn't filled with dusty boxes or dangerous chemicals. It was a classroom. An ordinary classroom with desks arranged in neat rows, a chalkboard at the front, and posters on the walls, except everything was covered in dust, a thick gray layer that muted the colors and obscured the details, and the air was heavy, stagnant, and smelled not of metal now, but of something sweet and cloying like overripe fruit. On each desk, a single identical object, a sunflower. Not fresh, like the one by the basketballs, but brittle and brown, the petals crumbling at the slightest touch. Hundreds of them, every desk, every chair, a single decaying sunflower. I backed away slowly, my breath catching in my throat. I needed to get out now. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something else. Scratched into the chalkboard, barely visible beneath the dust, were words. Not a lesson, not an equation, but a single repeating phrase, over and over, filling the entire board. Count them. I finished the last of the desks, wiping down the grime with a damp cloth. It was a pointless task, really. They'd be covered again by morning. Kids, you know. Sticky fingers dropped snacks, the general chaos of being 10 years old. Still, it was something to do, something to fill the hours and justify the paycheck. I was in the third grade wing, room 3B, and had just started on the little cubbies at the back. The fluorescent lights hummed, a constant low thrum that usually faded into the background. I was organizing the haphazard pile of jackets and backpacks, trying to match the name tags to the belongings. Mostly winter coats still, even though spring was officially here. People were slow to let go. I found a bright pink snowsuit with Cassie, scrawled in glitter glue across the label. Cassie. I think my daughter Leo had a friend named Cassie in kindergarten. It felt like a lifetime ago. That's when I felt it. A subtle vibration, a tremor in the floor beneath my feet. It wasn't strong, more like a persistent buzzing, like a phone on silent in your pocket. At first, I thought it was a truck driving by or maybe construction work happening somewhere nearby. But the windows were closed and the school was pretty isolated. Plus, it wasn't the kind of rumble you get from heavy machinery. It was finer, more delicate. It felt like it was coming from the floor, not through it. I paused, listening. The humming of the lights seemed to shift, to sync with the vibration. For a second, I thought I was imagining it. Just tired. It had been a long week, and I hadn't been sleeping well since Leo got sick. I bent down, pressing my ear to the linoleum. Yes, there it was, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor. Then I remembered something Tam had said during the initial briefing, something about vibrations. It wasn't a clear rule, not like the inventory, more of a warning, a casual aside. If you ever feel anything unusual, anything like a vibration in the floor, and there's no obvious explanation, head straight for the janitor's closet by the gymnasium. It's reinforced. Safest place in the building. Reinforced. What did that even mean? I dismissed it. Initially. Probably just old pipes, settling foundations, something perfectly normal. I was letting my imagination run wild. This place was old. Things shifted and creaked. I was being ridiculous, but the vibration didn't stop. If anything, it was getting slightly stronger, though still barely noticeable. It wasn't a sound, it was a feeling, a tingling in the soles of my feet. And then I remembered the way Tam had said unusual. The emphasis on it, the way she'd looked right through me when she said it. It wasn't about pipes, it wasn't about foundations, it was about something else, something she hadn't explicitly stated. I didn't bother to analyze it further. I didn't try to find a rational explanation, I just reacted. I straightened up, dropped the snowsuit, and walked. Not ran, walked. Running felt wrong, like it would attract attention. The janitor's closet was at the other end of the wing, past the art room and the music room. Each step sent a faint echo through the empty hallway. The vibration followed me, growing subtly more pronounced with each stride. The closet was small, cramped, filled with cleaning supplies and spare light bulbs. It smelled of pine cleaner and dust. It wasn't reinforced in any visible way. Just a standard metal door, a simple latch. I closed the door behind me, the click echoing in the confined space. Immediately, the vibration lessened. Not disappeared, but muffled, distant. I leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. 2:17 a.m. I started a timer, just to see how long it took to stop. 30 seconds. The vibration faded to almost nothing. 1 minute. Barely perceptible. 2 minutes. Gone. I stared at the timer, feeling a strange mix of relief and emptiness. It was over. Whatever it was over. But I hadn't seen anything. I hadn't heard anything. I hadn't understood anything. I just obeyed. I switched off the timer, then sat on an overturned bucket, running a hand over my face. The air in the closet felt stale, oppressive. A small, almost imperceptible layer of dust coated everything. When I stood up, I noticed a faint, chalky residue on my palm. It wasn't from the floor, it was finer, almost like powder. I rubbed it off, a little shiver crawling down my spine. I had to finish my rounds. Room 3B was still half done, but I knew with a certainty that settled like a stone in my gut that the school wasn't quite the same as it had been before. And I knew, too, that I wouldn't be looking at the floors the same way again. I was buffing the linoleum in the main hallway near the trophy cases. It was a mindless job, really. Just back and forth, the machine humming, the smell of wax filling the air. It was relaxing. The school was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles in after everyone has left for the night. Just me, the hum of the buffer, and the occasional creak of the building settling. I was thinking about my stamps, actually. I'd gotten a new shipment from a dealer in Germany, a few mint-condition commemoratives from the Weimar Republic. I needed to find time to catalog them. Helen usually helps me with that. She has a better eye for detail than I do. The floor was particularly grimy tonight, probably from the regional basketball tournament last week. Kids tracking in mud and whatever else they track in. I'd already done the gym, though. That was a nightmare, popcorn mostly, and something sticky. I didn't want to think about what the sticky was. I focused on the swirling pattern the buffer was making, the way the light reflected off the polished surface. It was therapeutic in a way. Anything was better than staring at the mortgage statement. I was nearing the intersection with the West Wing, the one that housed the administrative offices, when I heard someone coming. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. It was Quincy. He was one of the day custodians. He usually kept to himself. He didn't talk much. I nodded as he passed. He gave a grunt in return. He hesitated, then stopped. "Kaz," he said, his voice low. "You're the overnight now, right?" "That's right," I replied, keeping the buffer moving. I didn't want to stop. It felt safer to keep moving. Tough gig, this one. He leaned against the wall, watching me work. Old man Hemlock. He didn't last a month. Hemlock. The guy before me. I vaguely remembered seeing his name on the schedule. I didn't know anything about him. "He quit?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Quit?" Quincy chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "No, he didn't quit. He just left. One day he was here, the next day he was gone. They said he had a family emergency, but everyone knew that wasn't it." My hand tightened on the buffer handle. The machine vibrated against my grip, a small, insistent tremor. I glanced at Quincy, noticing for the first time the dark circles under his eyes. He looked haunted. "What happened?" I asked. I immediately regretted it. The question felt wrong. I hadn't meant to ask. It just slipped out. Quincy's gaze flickered around the hallway, as if he was afraid of being overheard. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked relieved, actually, like a weight had been lifted. "It's just stories," he said quickly. "Old wives' tales, people like to talk. They say he started asking questions about what happened here before you and me. About old Mr. Abernathy, the custodian before him. Nobody knows what happened to Abernathy either. He vanished, just gone." I abruptly stopped the buffer. The sudden silence felt deafening. It was just stories. That's all. Old rumors. People filling the quiet with nonsense. Quincy was probably just trying to scare me. He was a strange guy. It was a school, for God's sake. What could possibly happen? Still, the way he'd looked, the way he'd hesitated, it was unsettling. I should just change the subject. I should have changed the subject the moment I asked the question. But Quincy wasn't finished. He was leaning closer now, his voice barely a whisper. "They say Abernathy started digging into the school's history. Old records, newspaper clippings, trying to find out what happened to the original groundskeeper. Old man Withers. He disappeared in the 1950s. Nobody ever found him." A sudden, high-pitched whine cut through the air. Not the buffer, something else. A thin, almost inaudible sound, like a dog whistle. It made my teeth ache. It wasn't loud enough to be localized, like it was coming from everywhere at once. I instinctively glanced down the hallway towards the administrative offices. I switched the buffer back on, forcing myself to resume the mindless back-and-forth motion. "Look, Quincy," I said, trying to sound firm. "I appreciate the history lesson, but I've got a lot of work to do." Quincy nodded, a strange knowing look on his face. He didn't say anything else. He just turned and walked away, his footsteps receding into the quiet of the school. I finished buffing the hallway, my movements mechanical, my mind racing. The whine had stopped, but the feeling of unease lingered. I didn't need to know about Old Man Hemlock or Abernathy or Withers. I just needed to finish my shift and go home. I needed to see Helen and the kids. The inventory rule from a few weeks ago ticked in the back of my mind. 2 missing basketballs. It wasn't logical. It wasn't connected. I just couldn't shake the feeling. And now, this talk about people disappearing. It was ridiculous. Still, I found myself avoiding looking directly down the West Wing toward the administrative offices. I made a mental note to check the light bulbs in the cafeteria. Anything to avoid going near there. I would finish the hallway, then move on to the gym again. Double-check the bleachers. Anything rather than investigate something I didn't understand. I finished the last section of the hallway, the wax gleaming under the fluorescent lights. As I turned the buffer off, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A small, almost imperceptible scratch on the metal casing right near the power switch. It wasn't there earlier. I was sure of it. I ran my finger over it. It felt sharp, deliberate, a tiny, almost invisible line, marring the smooth surface. I hadn't done that. I never paid attention to the machine's casing. It was just a machine. Now, though, it felt different, like it was watching me. I had to get out of here. I was stripping the floor in the art room. It was tedious work. The smell of the chemical stripper was thick and acrid, even with the windows open. It always felt colder in the art room, even in the summer. The tile was ancient, little mosaic squares, and the grime had built up over decades. Mrs. Davison, the art teacher, was meticulous. I knew she'd notice if I missed a spot. I was using the automatic stripper, the big machine with the rotating brushes, and it was surprisingly calming. The steady hum and the rhythmic swish of the brushes were predictable. After everything with Quincy, I needed predictable. I'd finished the first coat of stripper and was letting it sit, checking the clock every few minutes. Helen always sent a text around 11:30, just to say goodnight and remind me to eat something. I hadn't touched my sandwich since starting. I was trying to decide if I had time for a quick smoke outside before she texted when I remembered the basketballs. 2 missing basketballs, it was absurd. I'd checked the inventory log 3 times now. 2 basketballs just gone. It didn't make any sense. Maybe Quincy had made it up. Maybe he'd seen me looking lost and confused and decided to have some fun. It was a school, not Fort Knox. People misplace things all the time. The timer on my phone buzzed. 11:32. Helen. Thinking of you. Don't work too hard. Love you. I typed back a quick love you too and tucked the phone back into my pocket. I needed to finish the art room, then the library, then if I was lucky I could skip the gym tonight. The thought of going back near those bleachers made my stomach churn. I hadn't felt a vibration since that night, but the memory of it was distinct. A low hum in my teeth. I rubbed my jaw just to be sure. Nothing. I started the stripper up again, moving it slowly across the floor. The West Wing was just around the corner. The administrative offices, Quincy's break room, the principal's office, that's where the vibration had started too. I'd been avoiding that side of the school all night, but the library was that way, and I wanted to be done. I was about 10 feet from the corner when it came back to me. Not Quincy's story, something else. A little phrase looping in my head, something I'd read in the handbook, something about corners. It wasn't a clear memory, more of a feeling, before turning a corner, something about signaling. Letting them know you were coming. It sounded ridiculous, superstitious. But the handbook was explicit about things, and the basketballs were missing, and Quincy had looked genuinely frightened. I couldn't quite recall the specifics, something about a knock. And a pause. 3 seconds. I pictured the handbook. The thin, spiral-bound pages, the tiny, dense print. I hadn't bothered to read it closely. I'd just skimmed for the basic procedures. I stopped the stripper, the brushes whining to a halt. I felt foolish. But what if? I walked to the wall, the cold tile pressing against my hand. It was a stupid rule, obviously, but the handbook was clear about consequences, a vague warning about disruption. I knocked twice, a sharp hollow sound that echoed in the empty hallway. 1, 2. I counted slowly. 1, 2, 3. The silence stretched, thick and unnerving. Then I rounded the corner. It wasn't a person. It wasn't an object I could identify. It was a space, or rather the absence of space. A shimmering distortion in the air, roughly human-shaped, but not solid. It wasn't transparent. Exactly. More like looking through heat haze or disturbed water. It flickered, constantly shifting, and filled the hallway, blocking my path to the library. It didn't seem to do anything, it just was. I hadn't imagined it. My breath hitched. I stumbled backward, knocking against the stripper machine. The chemical smell seemed to intensify, stinging my nostrils. I didn't look at it again. I couldn't. I just backed away, slowly, deliberately, until I was around the corner, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't dare run. I didn't dare make a sound. I just kept backing up, my eyes fixed on the spot where it had been, expecting it to follow. It didn't. I turned the stripper back on, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the handle. I didn't finish stripping the art room. I didn't even pretend to. I just turned it off, gathered my supplies, and walked back to the main office. I didn't look down the West Wing again. I locked the door behind me and sat in the darkness, staring at the security monitors, willing Helen to text again. I didn't understand what I'd seen. I didn't want to understand. I just wanted to go home. But I knew with a chilling certainty that I wouldn't be able to look at a corner the same way again, and that the inventory rule, the vibration rule, the history rule, they weren't about basketballs or floors or old groundskeepers. They were about something else entirely, something waiting, and I'd just given it permission to be there. I was waxing the floor in the cafeteria. It was a Friday night, 2 in the morning, and the smell of lemon cleaner was starting to give me a headache. Not a bad headache, just a dull, persistent throb behind my eyes. I liked the cafeteria, though. It was normal. Big, brightly lit, stainless steel counters, rows of plastic chairs. It smelled like day-old pizza and disinfectant. Nothing like the West Wing, or the basement. I moved the waxing machine in overlapping arcs, the buffer spinning, polishing the linoleum to a high gloss. It was mindless work, which was exactly what I needed. My stamp collection was waiting for me at home, a few new acquisitions I'd picked up at the show last weekend. I'd promised Clara I'd help Leo with his science project on Saturday, a volcano. He was so excited. He'd already gathered all the materials, baking soda, vinegar, red food coloring. I just needed to get through this shift and pay the mortgage. That was always there, a low hum of anxiety beneath everything else. I'd finished about half the floor when I noticed it. A flickering. Not of the lights themselves, but around the lights, like they were struggling to stay lit, the edges of their illumination wavering. I glanced at the fluorescent tubes, expecting to see one burn out. They were all steady, glowing with that harsh, sterile light. I blinked. The flickering was still there. Subtler, maybe, but definitely there. It reminded me of static on an old TV, or the way heat rises off asphalt on a hot summer day, a distortion. I told myself it was exhaustion. I hadn't been sleeping well, worrying about the house, about Clara, about Leo's grades. In this job, it was isolating, spending 8 hours alone in a silent school, knowing there were things I didn't understand. It was enough to make anyone see things. It was just fatigue, my eyes playing tricks on me. Then the lights went out. Not a pop, or a flicker, or a gradual dimming, just gone. Complete darkness. The waxing machine sputtered and died, leaving a ringing silence. I froze. My hand instinctively went to my pocket, fumbling for my phone. I needed to check the breaker box. Maybe the whole school had lost power. That happens sometimes, especially with these old buildings. But then I remembered the handbook, something about the lights. A phrase surfaced, fragmented and unsettling. If the lights go out, do not illuminate. Just that. No explanation, no reason. Just a stark, unnerving directive. I remembered skimming it, dismissing it as another one of the school's odd, overprotective rules, like the one about the basketballs, or the one about not asking about the previous custodians. It had seemed paranoid. But after everything that had happened, after the distortion in the hallway, after Quincy's fear, I knew better. I clenched my fist, resisting the urge to turn on the flashlight on my phone. It felt wrong. Viscerally wrong, like violating a boundary I hadn't even known existed. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and shallow in the darkness. The faint scent of lemon cleaner seemed to intensify, almost metallic. I closed my eyes, trying to calm my racing pulse. It was just a power outage, a temporary inconvenience. I would wait. The silence stretched. It wasn't a natural silence. It was thick, pressing, like the air itself was holding its breath. I could feel the weight of the darkness, a palpable presence that seemed to surround me. I wanted to move, to feel my way to the wall, to find the light switch, to do something. But I couldn't. The rule was clear. Stay where you are. Don't illuminate. I stood there, frozen, for what felt like an eternity. My legs started to ache. My back protested the stillness. I imagined the cafeteria, shrouded in darkness, a vast, empty space filled with unseen shadows, and then a sound, a faint scratching, coming from the kitchen. It wasn't the sound of a rodent. It wasn't the sound of settling pipes. It was deliberate, like something was dragging itself across the floor, slowly, methodically, closer. I didn't dare open my eyes. I didn't dare breathe. I just stood there, rigid, listening to the scratching get closer and closer. It stopped right on the other side of the serving counter. The silence returned, heavier than before. Then, a new sound. A soft, wet thud, like something falling, and a faint, almost imperceptible whisper. I couldn't make out any words, but I knew, with a bone-chilling certainty, that it was directed at me. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the lights flickered back on. The cafeteria was exactly as I'd left it. The waxing machine sat silent in the middle of the floor. The waxed portion of the linoleum gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. But something was different. The stainless steel counters, usually pristine, were smeared with a dark, viscous substance. It looked like mud, or maybe something darker, and on the floor, directly in front of the serving counter, lay a single, perfectly formed origami crane, made from what looked like a page torn from a history textbook. I didn't recognize the subject, and the kitchen door was slightly ajar. I didn't go into the kitchen. I finished waxing the floor, my hands trembling. I skipped the last few feet near the serving counter, leaving a small, unpolished patch of linoleum. I locked the cafeteria door and walked back to the main office. The origami crane burned into my memory. I needed to tell Clara about the lights, about everything, but I knew she wouldn't believe me, and I couldn't tell her about the crane because I knew with a growing dread that it wasn't meant for her. It was meant for me, and it was a message, a warning, and I had no idea what it meant. I was restocking the paper towel dispensers in the girls' restrooms. It's a stupid task, honestly. The kids go through them like they're confetti. I had the industrial-sized box balanced on my hip, and the automatic dispensers whirred and clicked as I refilled them. It's satisfying in a small way. Seeing the neat rows of white paper, knowing they won't run out mid-hand wash. It's a tiny victory in a job full of mostly invisible work. The tile floor was cool under my work boots. The scent of lemon disinfectant hung in the air, battling with the lingering, faint smell of teenage perfume. I'd been at it for about 20 minutes, working my way down the row. No music. I'd left my headphones in my lunch bag. It was quieter that way. Easier to hear if something needed hearing. I still jumped at every creak, every settling sound, but it was getting less frequent. Maybe I was just getting used to the building. I finished the last dispenser and was about to move on to the soap when I noticed it. The logbook. It was lying open on the counter. The one Clara keeps for maintenance notes. Usually it's closed, tucked under the hand dryer. I hadn't touched it in weeks, not since. Well, since everything started feeling off. I glanced over. Someone had written a note in it, but it was odd. The ink was black, like the rest. But it looked like someone had written something, then scribbled it out, really aggressively. It was thick, black marker, layered over and over until you could barely see the original writing underneath. Just smears and shadows. I frowned. Usually, Clara's handwriting is neat, precise. Even when she's annoyed, it's legible. This was a mess, a frantic mess. And it wasn't a maintenance note. It wasn't about a leaky faucet or a broken light bulb. It was just crossed out words. My stomach tightened. I remembered reading the handbook again after the power outage. That document Clara made me sign. The one I hadn't really read, just skimmed for the essentials. It was buried somewhere in the middle, A section about record keeping, something about alterations, a rule, something about if you find something erased. I couldn't recall the exact wording. Something about noting the location, but not trying to read what was under the black. It was probably nothing, just Clara having a bad day. Maybe she'd made a mistake, written something she regretted, and tried to cover it up. People do that. I do that. I've got plenty of grocery lists with crossed-out items I ended up not buying. It didn't feel like that, though. Something about the intensity of the scribbling, the way it obliterated the writing underneath, felt different. I told myself it was just my nerves, that I was looking for things to be weird because everything had been weird. I was letting the shadows get to me. I needed to focus on the job, get the work done, and go home to my family. But the handbook kept nagging at me, that vague recollection of a rule, that feeling that something wasn't right. I stepped closer to the counter, my hand hovering over the logbook. I could just peek, just lift the page and angle it towards the light. Maybe I could make out a few letters, just to satisfy my curiosity, just to prove to myself that it was nothing. But the rule, that nagging impression of a rule, don't read the original. Don't ask who wrote it. It wasn't a strong feeling, not like the corners rule or the vibration rule, but it was there, a subtle pressure in the back of my mind. I grabbed a fresh paper towel from the dispenser and wiped my sweaty palms on it. This was ridiculous. I was being paranoid. I was letting a few crossed-out words ruin my night. I was a grown man, not a child spooked by shadows. I reached for my pen, the one I always keep clipped to my shirt pocket. I opened the logbook to a clean page, and with a deliberate motion I wrote, "Page 7, entry obscured." Significant overwriting, location noted. I didn't write what was obscured. I didn't write why it felt wrong. I just noted the location. That was it. That was what the rule said, or at least what I remembered it saying. I closed the logbook, smoothed the cover, and placed it back under the hand dryer. It felt wrong, like I'd just acknowledged something I shouldn't have. Like I'd opened a door that was meant to stay closed. I finished checking the soap dispensers, then walked out of the girls' restroom. I didn't look back. The hallway was silent, too silent. I could feel the weight of the school around me, pressing in on all sides. I checked my watch. 2:17 a.m., still a long night ahead. I started walking towards the library. I needed to dust the shelves. It was a mindless task, a good task. A task that would keep my hands busy and my mind from wandering. As I walked, I noticed something else. Something I hadn't noticed before. The air in the hallway felt colder, not just cool. Like the air conditioning was set low, but genuinely cold. Like a draft, but the windows were all sealed. And there was no breeze. I rubbed my arms, trying to warm myself. It wasn't just the temperature, there was a subtle vibration in the floor. Not the deep, resonant rumble I'd felt before, but a faint, high-pitched tremor, almost imperceptible. I slowed my pace. The vibration rule. Stay away from the source. Find a stable location. But there was no source. Not that I could see, just the cold and the tremor. And, for the first time, I felt a prickling sensation at the back of my neck, like I was being watched, not by a person, but by something else. Something unseen, and I realized, with a growing sense of dread, that the logbook wasn't the end of it. It was just the beginning. I gripped my pen tighter and kept walking towards the library. I had shelves to dust and a feeling, deep in my gut, that I was running out of time. I was stripping and re-waxing the linoleum in the teacher's lounge. It was tedious, back-breaking work, but the quiet was a relief. The floors had seen better days. Years of coffee spills and tracked in dirt had left them dull and scratched. Mr. Henderson, the art teacher, had a habit of leaving little puddles of paint thinner near the sink, and those always required extra scrubbing. I was on my third coat of wax, slowly working my way around the perimeter, trying to get a consistent sheen. The smell of the wax was thick, but preferable to the lingering scent of stale coffee and disinfectant. I had the radio on low, tuned to a classic rock station, mostly instrumental music, nothing with lyrics. Yolanda, the daytime secretary, always complained about my music choices, saying it was depressing. I told her I preferred it to her polka station. She hadn't spoken to me much since. Around 11:30, Flora came in carrying a vase, A large glass vase filled with lilies, white lilies with those enormous trumpet-shaped blooms. They smelled powerful, like funerals. "Oh, Kaz, you're still at it?" she asked, setting the vase down on the table near the coffee machine. "These are from my garden. Thought they'd brighten the place up." I grunted, acknowledging her with a nod. My arms were starting to ache. I hadn't realized how long I'd been kneeling. "They're beautiful, Flora," I said, which wasn't a lie. They were beautiful, but they also felt wrong. The smell was too strong, too sweet. It felt out of place in the sterile environment of the teacher's lounge. She chattered on about the weather, about her grandson's soccer game, about the new principal. I mostly just nodded and kept waxing, trying to drown her out with the music. I felt a tightness in my chest, a subtle pressure that had nothing to do with the physical exertion. It took a moment to place it, but it was a flicker of recognition from the logbook. Something about things that grew, a sense of restriction, a feeling that something shouldn't be here. I remembered a phrase, hazy and incomplete, something about not bringing the outside in. Or maybe it was about feeding something. I couldn't remember exactly. It felt urgent though, important. Honestly, I thought it was the fumes getting to me. The wax, the lilies, the paint thinner, it was a potent combination. I was probably just imagining things. I was tired, stressed about the mortgage, and overly sensitive after everything with the logbook. It was just a bunch of flowers. But the feeling wouldn't go away. That tightening in my chest intensified. Then I remembered the vibration rule. Even when there was no vibration, the feeling of wrongness was enough to prompt a relocation. It wasn't a logical connection, but it felt similar. Without a word, I stood up, my knees protesting with a loud crack. I walked over to the table, picked up the vase carefully, so as not to spill any water, and carried it out of the lounge. Flora called after me. "Kaz, what are you doing?" I ignored her. I walked through the back door, out into the cool night air. The school grounds were dark and quiet. I set the vase down on the concrete loading dock, away from the building. The lilies looked almost luminous in the darkness. "Just getting some air," I called back, my voice sounding strained even to my own ears. Flora came out onto the loading dock, her face etched with confusion. "But they would have looked so nice in there." "They're nice out here," I said, which was another lie. They looked unsettling out here, exposed to the darkness. "Are you feeling all right, Kaz?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. "You seem a little off." I shrugged. "Just a long night," I said. "Lots to do." She didn't press it. She just stared at the flowers for a moment, then shook her head and went back inside. I stood there on the loading dock for a long time, watching the lilies. The air smelled cleaner now, somehow, less oppressive. The tightness in my chest eased slightly. I knew I couldn't explain why I'd moved the flowers. I couldn't tell Flora about the logbook, about the strange rules, about the feeling that something was watching us all. She'd think I was crazy, and maybe I was. I went back inside, finished waxing the floor, and continued with my rounds. But the image of those white lilies, standing alone in the darkness, stayed with me. They didn't brighten the place up at all. They just felt like a warning. And I had a feeling, a cold, creeping feeling, that I hadn't seen the last of it. That this was just the beginning of something I didn't understand and wasn't sure I wanted to. The air in the lounge felt different now. Lighter, but also empty. Like something had been averted, or perhaps just delayed. I was stripping the finish off the gym floor, section by section. It was tedious work. The kind where your back aches before you even start, and your knees complain with every pass of the machine. The smell of the stripper was brutal, a chemical sweetness that clung to the back of your throat. I was listening to a baseball game on a small battery-powered radio, trying to drown out the whine of the buffer. It was late in the season, with playoffs looming. A distraction, I guess. A good one. I'd finished the section closest to the bleachers and was moving towards the far end, near the double doors leading to the parking lot. That's when I noticed it. or rather when I didn't notice it. The key. It wasn't on the ring clipped to my belt loop. I patted my pockets. Front, back, both sides. Nothing. I retraced my steps, running the buffer back over the section I'd just finished, scanning the polished wood. Nothing. My pulse quickened, a dull throb in my temple. Losing the key wasn't good. It wasn't just a matter of getting locked out. I remembered reading something a while ago, when I first started. The employee handbook, maybe? Or one of those laminated sheets they had posted near the time clock. Something about the key. A single key. Don't lose it. I couldn't recall the specifics, just a vague sense of urgency. Something about reporting it immediately. A replacement process, a formality, I probably thought at the time. Probably it just fell out. I'd been bent over a lot, working the machine. It happens. I'd find it. I went back to the bleachers, systematically searching between the seats, under the metal frames. Nothing. It wasn't where I thought I'd left it. It wasn't anywhere. A stupid mistake. I should have been more careful. I was already picturing the paperwork, the questions. Mr. Abernathy, the district supervisor, would be less than thrilled. I could hear his voice already, dry and disapproving. It felt ridiculous to be this stressed over a key. Just a key, still. The thought nagged at me. Something about it felt wrong, like it wasn't just a lost key. I remembered a fragment of the rule. Something about another way in. A secondary path. It was hazy, imprecise. I dismissed it. Just the exhaustion talking, the late hours, the lingering anxiety from the lilies. That's all it was. I was letting my imagination run wild. I was about to head to the main office to report it, when I saw it. Lying on the floor, directly in the path of the buffer, halfway between the bleachers and where I'd been working, the key, as if someone had deliberately placed it there. It wasn't just lying there, though. It was clean. Too clean. The floor around it was covered in a fine layer of wood dust, the residue from the stripping process. But the key itself was spotless, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. It hadn't been sitting there long enough to avoid the dust. A coldness settled in my stomach. It wasn't relief I felt, but something else. Something that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I didn't leave it there. I distinctly remember clipping it back on my belt after finishing the first section. I was meticulous about that. Years of stamp collecting, I suppose. Everything in its place. I stared at the key for a long moment, then down at my belt loop. Empty. I hadn't imagined it being gone. The thought of reporting it, of going through the formal process, felt suddenly wrong. It wasn't about the paperwork anymore. It was about something else, something I couldn't articulate, something that told me, with chilling certainty, that reporting the lost key wouldn't solve anything. It would only make things worse. I bent down, picked up the key, and clipped it back onto my belt. The metal felt cold against my fingers, almost slick. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't request a replacement. I finished stripping the floor, the radio a meaningless drone in the background. The smell of the stripper seemed stronger now, more suffocating. When I finished, I meticulously cleaned the machine, then walked my tools back to the storage closet. I didn't look back at the spot where I'd found the key. I didn't want to. I just wanted to get out of there. And I knew, with a sickening certainty, that I'd made a mistake. A terrible, irreversible mistake. I felt a phantom weight on my hip, a constant reminder of the key and the path it might open. The shift ended like any other, with the automatic locks clicking shut behind me as I walked out the front doors. The sunrise was already painting the sky a bruised purple and orange. I hadn't seen a sunrise like that in months. Not really. Usually I was driving home, already exhausted, while it was still dark. It felt wrong that I was seeing it now, like I'd earned the view by being awake when I shouldn't have been. I drove straight home, bypassing the diner. Usually I'd grab a coffee and a stale donut, something to stave off the exhaustion, but I didn't want to sit there, surrounded by people pretending everything was normal. I wanted to be home, to see Sarah and the kids. Sarah was already up making pancakes. The smell of them, sweet and buttery, usually filled me with a kind of quiet happiness today. It just felt loud, Overpowering, I kept expecting something else to be mixed in with it, something I couldn't identify. I caught myself sniffing at the air, trying to pinpoint it. Just pancakes. I told myself it was just the lingering smell of the floor stripper, clinging to my clothes. The kids were bouncing off the walls, excited for Saturday. I tried to get involved, to build a fort with Leo and read to Maya, but I kept finding my gaze drifting to corners. Not deliberately, not at first, just a quick glance. A check. It was stupid. The school was behind me. I was home. But the impulse was there, insistent, like a muscle memory I hadn't known I had. I tried to dismiss it, to chalk it up to being tired, to the stress of the job. It was just a weird week. But then I noticed I was counting things. Not obsessively, not yet, just subconsciously. The number of Cheerios on Leo's plate. The number of stuffed animals in Maya's bed. The number of cracks in the kitchen tile. I stopped myself, forcing my attention back to the kids, to Sarah. But it kept happening during breakfast. While driving Maya to her soccer practice, even at the hardware store, I found myself quickly glancing at the rows of hammers, mentally tallying them. It wasn't about needing to know the exact number. It was about the feeling of rightness that came with it. Or, more accurately, the feeling of wrongness when the numbers didn't align. A subtle imbalance that made my skin crawl. I didn't tell Sarah. What was I going to say? Honey, I can't stop counting things now. She already worried about me. The medical bills, the second job, the way I'd been coming home withdrawn and quiet. I didn't want to add to it. The school posted the overnight custodian position again 1 week later. I saw the ad online, scrolling through the local listings. It wasn't even a particularly good ad, just the basic description, the pay rate, no mention of the peculiarities. I scrolled past it, telling myself someone else would take it, someone who didn't know, someone who wouldn't notice. Last night, I was at Helen's birthday party. It was in a new community center, brightly lit, lots of open space, and as soon as I walked in, I started to do it. Not the counting, not yet, something more subtle. I started mapping the corners of every room in my mind, noticing the angles, the sight lines, assessing how quickly I could move from one to the other. I found myself unconsciously positioning myself so I could see multiple corners at once. I didn't realize what I was doing until I saw Quincy watching me, a strange expression on his face. I quickly looked away, forcing myself to focus on the conversation, but the impulse remained. It's been 3 weeks since my last shift, and I still can't walk into a room without tracing the corners with my eyes. It's automatic. It's quiet. It's always there.